The body arrived at 2:47 in the morning with no name, no dog tags, and a pulse so faint the paramedics had already written him off. He was military. That much was obvious from the muscle structure alone, the kind built over years of carrying weight through terrain that would kill ordinary men. But his eyes were open and fixed on nothing, pupils blown wide and unresponsive, and the trauma team at Ravencrest Medical Center moved around him with the practiced efficiency of people who'd already decided the outcome. Nobody noticed the nurse standing at the edge of the room. Nobody noticed what she noticed. On the inside of his left forearm, almost invisible beneath the grime and dried blood, a single puncture mark. Clean, deliberate, not from a needle, not from shrapnel. Emily Carter pressed 2 fingers against the man's wrist, felt nothing, then looked at his face. His jaw moved. Almost nothing. A fraction of a millimeter. She leaned in. "I see you," she said quietly, and the dead man's hand closed around her fingers. Before we go any further, if this story already has you holding your breath, hit that subscribe button and stick with me to the very end. Drop a like and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Let's go. Emily Carter had been at Ravencrest Medical Center for 14 months, and in that time, she had learned 3 things about working under Dr. Victor Kane. First, arrive early, leave late, and never let him catch you standing still. Second, do not disagree with him in front of witnesses. Third, and most important, do not be right when he is wrong. She had broken the 3rd rule exactly twice, and both times it had cost her something she couldn't fully recover. The first time, a scheduled shift rotation that mysteriously vanished from the board. The second, a patient commendation she'd written that somehow never made it to administration. Kane had a way of smoothing things over that left no fingerprints, and everyone on the floor knew it, and everyone on the floor said nothing. Emily said nothing too. That was the part people would never understand about her. The silence wasn't defeat. It was habit. A very old, very deliberate habit formed in places where talking got people killed. She was 29 years old, 5'6", with dark circles she'd stopped trying to hide, and a ponytail that frayed by the end of every 12-hour shift. She had a way of moving through the trauma ward that some nurses called efficient and some doctors called invisible, and she'd come to understand that invisible was sometimes the most powerful thing you could be in a room. Tonight, invisible was working against her. The patient had come in at 2:47 a.m. via ambulance. No identification. Civilian clothes that had been cut away to reveal a body that told a different story. Layered scarring across the torso and upper arms, consistent with blast fragmentation. Old exit wounds on the left shoulder. A surgical scar on the right knee that matched the kind of precision work done in field hospitals rather than operating rooms. Whoever he was, he had lived rough and survived things that should have finished him. But the trauma team wasn't thinking about any of that. They were focused on the presenting symptoms: unresponsive, fixed pupils, absent reflexes, negligible pulse, blood pressure that had flatlined on the paramedic monitor before recovering just barely enough to mean something. The working theory was catastrophic head trauma from an unknown incident. Kane had already used the word vegetative twice in the first 4 minutes. Emily stood at the edge of Bay 3 and watched and listened and kept her hands at her sides. She had been the one to log the patient in. She had been the one to cut the clothes. And she had been the one, the only one, who had noticed the mark on his inner forearm before the chaos of line placement and intubation made access to that arm complicated. It wasn't a bruise. It wasn't an IV site. It was a puncture wound, circular, with a very slight raised border that had already begun to fade the way certain compounds faded when they bonded to tissue. She'd seen marks like that exactly once before in her life, in a context she was not supposed to discuss, and the sight of it had sent a cold wire of recognition straight down the back of her neck. She didn't say anything yet. She went to the supply room instead and stood in the fluorescent silence for 30 seconds with her eyes closed, running through what she knew, what she needed, and what the probability was that she was wrong. The probability was low. She wished it were higher. When she came back, Dr. Kane was holding court at the foot of the gurney with 2 residents and a med student, explaining the likely brain death protocol timeline in the patient as teaching case tone he reserved for situations where he'd already made up his mind. Pupils are fixed and dilated bilaterally, he said. GCS is 3. We'll run confirmatory tests at 6 hours, but the picture is fairly clear. Catastrophic anoxic injury, probably preceded by cardiac event. He glanced at the monitoring screen. He's not coming back. Emily said, his muscle tone is inconsistent with vegetative state. The room got quiet in the specific way rooms got quiet when someone junior interrupted someone who did not expect to be interrupted. Kane turned and looked at her with the particular expression he saved for nurses who forgot their place. Not quite contempt, but in the same neighborhood. Excuse me? His limb tone, Emily said. It's not flaccid. It should be flaccid if the picture is what you're describing. There's mild resistance in both forearms. Mild resistance, Kane repeated, the way you repeat something to demonstrate how stupid it sounds. Yes. Carter. He said her name like a period. I appreciate the enthusiasm, but I have 30 years of... I also found a puncture mark on his inner forearm that I'd like to document and have looked at more closely. One of the residents, a second-year named Priya, who sometimes brought Emily coffee at the end of double shifts, made a very small movement that might have been a wince. Kane took a breath. Are you currently the attending on this case? No. Then perhaps you could do your job and let me do mine. He turned back to the residents. Emily stood where she was for 3 more seconds, long enough to not seem like she was retreating, and then she went back to her station. She pulled the patient's intake form toward her and wrote down everything she'd observed in precise, time-stamped clinical language. The muscle tone, the puncture mark, the measurement and placement of the wound. She noted her observations clearly, signed her name, and put the form in the chart. Then she went back to Bay 3 and stood at the periphery of the team's work and waited. She was waiting for something specific. She didn't have to wait long. At 3:21 a.m., when the residents had moved on to a new admission and the med student had gone to get coffee, and Kane was at the nursing station dictating notes, Emily moved to the patient's bedside. She picked up his left hand. Not taking his pulse, she already knew the pulse was there, faint but present. She held his hand and watched his face. If you can hear me, she said, very low, barely above the ambient sound of monitors. Squeeze twice. Nothing for 4 seconds. Then 2 small, controlled compressions against her palm. She kept her expression still. She had learned a very long time ago how to receive information without broadcasting it on her face. Blink once if you're in pain. 1 slow, deliberate blink. Blink twice if you've been chemically restrained. 2 blinks. She set his hand down carefully, adjusted the blanket over his arm, and walked to the medication supply station. She pulled up the toxicology reference on the terminal, not the standard panel, the extended one that required a secondary login she technically shouldn't have memorized, but did, and began cross-referencing the presentation against compounds that produce locked-in states with preserved consciousness and motor mimicry that could fool a standard neuro exam. The list was short. Most of them were controlled. One of them was classified. Emily stood in front of that screen for 15 seconds. Then she printed the page, folded it, put it in her pocket, and went back to her patient. His name, she didn't know yet. What she knew was that he was conscious. He was in pain. He had been deliberately incapacitated by something that wasn't in any civilian formulary she'd ever seen. And someone had brought him here, not to save him, to disappear him. She worked through the next hour carefully, the way she'd been taught to work in environments where the wrong move had consequences she couldn't afford. She ran her assessment again under the cover of routine nursing checks, vitals, repositioning, line inspection, and built a clinical picture that she documented with the same quiet thoroughness she brought to everything. She noted the slight asymmetry in his pupil response under direct light, the way his right hand had slightly more grip strength than his left, which suggested the compound wasn't evenly distributed or had been administered with a directional target. The faint evidence of dehydration that placed initial exposure roughly 18 to 24 hours before admission. She was good at this. She had always been good at this. It was a specific kind of intelligence, pattern recognition under pressure, and it had been trained into her over years until it ran like a background process she couldn't switch off even when she wanted to. At 4:15, she found what she needed in the secondary tox database, a compound designation that matched the presentation, a military origin substance developed for field immobilization of high-value targets, administered via a pressurized microneedle device that left a characteristic wound pattern, circular, raised border, rapid fade. She had seen it once, in a classified briefing, in another life. Emily sat in the medication room with the printout on her knee and a cold clarity settling over her that felt, in a way she couldn't explain to anyone here, like coming home. She went to Kane at 4:30. She knew it was the wrong move even as she made it. Not because she was wrong, but because he was exactly the kind of person who would make this about the wrong things. But she didn't have a better option. The patient needed intervention that she couldn't provide alone, and the clock on whatever had been administered to him was not standing still. "I need 5 minutes," she said. Kane looked up from his notes with the expression of a man being interrupted during a task he'd already mentally completed. "Carter, it's 4:30. The patient in Bay 3 is conscious." A pause. Then, "I've already explained." He squeezed my hand, twice, on command. He can respond to verbal cues, and he has preserved motor function in both upper extremities. He has not suffered catastrophic neurological injury. He's been chemically incapacitated by a compound that mimics vegetative state, and I have the presentation cross-referenced to a compound profile that matches exactly what I'm seeing. She put the folded printout on his desk. "This is not a brain-dead patient. This is a conscious man who is trapped." Kane looked at the printout. He didn't pick it up. "You ran an extended tox panel without an order." "I ran a reference query. I didn't order labs." "You're telling me that a patient with a GCS of 3, absent reflexes and fixed pupils is, what, faking it?" "Not faking. Paralyzed. It's different. And if I'm right, he's been in there fully conscious for potentially over 24 hours, and whatever was administered to him is still metabolizing. And if we don't get ahead of it, that's enough." Kane's voice had dropped to the register he used when he'd decided something. "You're speculating wildly based on a printout from a database you shouldn't have been accessing, about a patient you are not qualified to diagnose, using theory that has no clinical foundation in anything you've been trained to do as a floor nurse." Emily held his gaze. "Run a BNPP panel and a modified nerve conduction study. Give me a result, and I'll walk away." "You'll walk away regardless." He picked up the printout and handed it back to her. "Carter, I've had 3 complaints about you in the past 6 months from attending staff. I've overlooked it because you're competent at basic care functions. But this, coming in here at 4 in the morning with conspiracy theories about your vegetative patient, this is not competence. This is a nurse who doesn't understand her lane." "With respect, Dr. Kane, I want you off Bay 3, he said. "Reassign yourself to the overnight admits. If I see you at that bedside again tonight, I'll be writing you up, and I promise you the outcome of that write-up won't be ambiguous." He turned back to his work. "We're done." Emily walked out of his office and down the hallway to Bay 3. She checked the patient's vitals. She documented everything again: the time, her intervention, Kane's response, the denial of her clinical recommendation. She wrote it all down in the same clean, precise language, signed it, and filed it in the chart. Then she stood at the bedside. "I'm not going to stop," she said. Very quiet. Not performing, not reassuring, just stating a fact. "But I need more time, and I need you to hang on." The hand under the blanket moved, not a squeeze, just a shift, the fingers spreading slightly and then settling. She thought, in a way she hadn't thought in years. Old signal. In the circles she'd once moved through, hand flat and open, meant copy. She had no idea how he knew her, or why he'd signaled her specifically, or what he was carrying that had gotten him here in the state he was in. But something at the base of her spine told her that finding out those answers was going to change a great deal more than one night shift. She went back to the floor and picked up her reassigned patients and worked the rest of the pre-dawn hours with the surface efficiency of someone doing exactly what they were supposed to do. Underneath it, she was running every angle she had. At 6 a.m., shift change began. Emily stayed past her hours, which was not unusual. She was often the last one to leave because the transition paperwork was easier when one person held the continuity of the whole floor in their head. Kane had gone upstairs to a department meeting. The overnight residents were handing off to the morning team. Bay 3 was quiet. She had 20 minutes, maybe less. She went to the bedside with a small kit she'd assembled from legitimate supplies, nothing that required a countersignature, nothing that would flag, and performed a rapid series of assessments that weren't in any nursing school curriculum, but were absolutely in the field medic training manual she'd completed at age 22 in a program that didn't officially exist. The compound was what she thought. The metabolic window was closing. If he didn't receive a counteragent in the next 6 to 8 hours, the paralysis would begin affecting involuntary muscle function, heart, diaphragm, and the outcome would be what Kane had already predicted, only it would be murder by inaction rather than natural progression. She needed one more thing from him. "I know you can hear me," she said. "I know what's in your system, and I think I know how to get you out of it, but I need to know who to call, because the people in this building aren't going to help me." She waited. His fingers moved on the blanket. Slow, deliberate. She watched them and she saw it. Not random movement. A pattern. Old alphabet, tap code, the kind of thing that got drilled into a person until it was as automatic as breathing. She counted the taps. Logan. She leaned a little closer. Last name. More taps. Slower now, the effort visible in the slight tremor of his forearm. Reed. She straightened up, looked at his face, looked at the fixed pupil mask of it, the performance of nothingness that a room full of physicians had accepted as truth, and felt the weight of exactly how bad this was beginning to fully land. Master Sergeant Logan Reed. She didn't know that name, but she knew the tier structure it implied. You didn't get a designation like that without being inside something significant, and you didn't end up chemically immobilized in a civilian hospital in Ashridge City at 3 a.m. without bringing that something significant with you. She was already composing the problem in her mind when he tapped again. 2 taps. A pause. 3 taps. She went very still. That wasn't a name or a letter string. That was a recognition signal, a specific one, the kind that only 2 people in the world would know to answer. "Where did you get that?" she said. His breathing didn't change. His pupils didn't move. But under her hand, his fingers pressed once, affirmative, and she understood that he hadn't stumbled into this hospital by accident, and he hadn't been found by her by coincidence. And whatever she had thought the shape of this night was, she had been wrong. She had exactly 6 hours to fix it, and she was already out of easy options. She walked back to the nursing station and picked up her bag and her jacket and clocked out normally, signed the handoff sheet, said good morning to 2 colleagues whose names she knew and who barely looked up, and walked to the elevator. In the elevator, she let herself have 4 seconds of being someone who was scared. Then the doors opened, and she walked out into the gray Ashridge morning, and she started making calls. She was still on her second call when she heard the footsteps behind her, quick, purposeful, the specific cadence of someone who'd been waiting. It was Priya, slightly breathless, holding a sealed envelope. "Emily." She thrust the envelope forward. "Kane left this at the nursing station before he went up. Said to make sure you got it before you left the building." Emily took the envelope, opened it. Termination of employment, effective immediately. Grounds? Insubordination, unauthorized access of clinical database, and interference with attending physician treatment decisions. She read it twice, not because she'd missed anything, because she needed to know if there was anything in it she could use. There wasn't. It was clean, calculated, and final. "Emily," Priya said quietly, "I'm sorry. I don't know what—" "It's okay." Emily folded the letter and put it in her jacket pocket. "You didn't do anything. Is there anything I can do?" Emily looked at her for a moment. Priya was good, she thought. One of the genuinely good ones, careful, bright, still uncompromised by the culture of self-preservation that ate people alive in places like this. "Yes," Emily said. "The patient in Bay 3. Don't let them move him. Don't let them change his status or run anything new without the full attending team present. Document everything that happens to him. Timestamps, initials, every intervention." She held Priya's gaze. "Can you do that?" Priya blinked. Yes. "Okay. Don't call attention to it. Just document." "Okay." Emily nodded and walked toward the exit. The rain hit her the moment the automatic doors opened. Cold, sideways, the kind of early morning rain that felt like an argument. She walked to the edge of the parking structure overhang and stood with her phone in her hand and tried to decide which problem to solve first. She was in the middle of making that decision when she heard it, distant at first. Then not. A deep rotary rhythm, more than one source, coming from the north and east simultaneously. She looked up, through the gap in the parking structure ceiling, at the cloud-gray sky over Ash Ridge. 2 helicopters. Then 3. Military configuration. She recognized the profile without having to think about it, the way you recognized a word in your native language. They were descending. Toward the hospital. Emily stood in the rain outside the building she had just been fired from and watched military helicopters drop below the cloud line over Ravencrest Medical Center, and she felt something cold and certain settle into the base of her chest. They weren't here for her. Not yet. But they were here because of him. Because of Logan Reed. And they were here now. Which meant the timeline she'd estimated at 6 to 8 hours was either already wrong, or someone on the other end of a very secure line had just made a decision that was going to change the shape of the next several hours completely. The lead helicopter cleared the roofline of the building next door, and then her phone rang. Unknown number. Military exchange she hadn't seen in years but still recognized on instinct. She answered it. "Carter," said a voice she didn't know. "Don't move. We're 30 seconds out." She didn't move. She stood in the rain with the termination letter in her pocket and watched the first helicopter touch down in the hospital parking lot, and the doors opened, and the people who came out of them were not wearing scrubs. They came out in a line, 6 of them, tactical gear without insignia, moving with the economy of people who'd done this in worse places than a hospital parking lot in the rain. The one at the front was a woman, mid-40s, short silver hair under a dark cap, carrying nothing except a satellite phone and a look that suggested she'd already decided how the next hour was going to go. She walked straight to Emily without breaking stride, scanning her once from boots to face with the practiced deficiency of a customs agent at a border crossing. "Carter," not a question. "Sergeant Major Diane Lusk, we spoke 30 seconds ago." She extended her hand and Emily shook it. "Is he still alive?" "Yes, but the window's closing." "How long?" 5 hours. Maybe 6 if his body mass is handling the metabolization rate. I think it is. I don't have a way to confirm without equipment I no longer have access to. Lusk absorbed that without blinking. "Why don't you have access?" Emily held up the folded letter. Lusk took it, read the first 3 lines, handed it back. "That's going to be somebody's problem," she said, and turned toward the building. "Walk with me." The automatic doors opened and the 6 operators moved through the lobby in a formation that was technically just people walking, but read as something else entirely to the security guard at the front desk, who stood up from his chair with the confused posture of a man whose instincts were telling him to do something and whose brain was trying to figure out what. Lusk showed him something in a slim black wallet without slowing down, and he sat back down. Emily moved alongside Lusk and tried to organize what she needed to say in the next 60 seconds before the elevator reached the trauma floor. "The attending physician on the case is named Victor Kane," she said. "He assessed the patient as brain dead and was preparing to move toward withdrawal of care. He's the one who filed the termination. He's also the one who denied 2 separate requests for the testing that would have confirmed what I found." "We know about Kane." Emily glanced at her. "How much do you know?" "Enough to be interested. Not enough to move on yet." The elevator opened and Lusk stepped in. "Right now, Logan is the priority. Everything else is secondary." "He was responsive as of approximately 90 minutes ago," Emily said. "Preserved upper extremity motor function, maintained consciousness, communicating via tap code. The compound is a modified nerve agent. I cross-referenced to a classification level profile I wasn't supposed to have access to, but the match is tight. I'd stake my license on it." She paused. "Except I don't have a license anymore." "You let me worry about that." The elevator opened onto the trauma floor, and everything changed at once. The morning nursing team was mid-handoff, clipboards and coffee cups, and the low-grade noise of shift transition. And then 6 people in tactical gear walked off the elevator and the noise stopped like someone had pulled a plug. A charge nurse Emily knew named Weston took one step forward with his mouth open and then thought better of it. Priya was at the far end of the hall. She saw Emily and her face did something complicated. Relief and alarm in equal measure. Lusk didn't stop at the desk. She went directly to Bay 3. Logan Reed was exactly as Emily had left him, supine, monitored, performing unconsciousness for an audience that had believed the performance. Lusk stood at the foot of the gurney and looked at him for a moment with something that might have been the military equivalent of emotion. Controlled, compressed, present only in the slight tightening around her eyes. "Logan," her voice was level, "it's Lusk. We're here. Carter's here. We're going to get you out." The hand on the blanket moved. Slow, open palm. Copy. One of the operators, a tall man with medic crosses on his sleeve that weren't standard, was already at the bedside with a case Emily recognized as a field lab kit. She moved to the other side of the gurney without being asked, because that was where she needed to be, and because nobody told her not to. "What's your read on counteragent?" Lusk asked her. "Modified atropine compound, but the dosage calculation is complicated by the delivery method and how long it's been in his system. Standard reversal protocol would be too aggressive given the metabolization window. I'd need to titrate carefully. Can you do that here? I need specific agents that aren't in the standard crash cart, and I need someone to authorize it because I am currently not employed by this hospital." Lusk looked at the medic. He opened the field case and Emily saw what was in it and felt something loosen in her chest. Not relief exactly, but the sensation of a problem that had been abstract becoming concrete and therefore solvable. "You're authorized by me," Lusk said. "That sufficient?" "Legally, no. Practically, yes." "Then, practically, let's proceed." Emily was already pulling on gloves. She worked the way she worked when the circumstances required her to be only the task. No peripheral awareness, no social management, no monitoring of how she was being perceived. The medic, his name was Torres, she gathered from a brief exchange between him and one of the other operators, stayed at her shoulder and handed her things before she finished asking for them, which meant he was good or he'd been briefed on her assessment, or both. The titration took 22 minutes. The first indication that it was working came at the 14-minute mark, when Logan's right hand moved with intention rather than the small passive tremors she'd been tracking. By 18 minutes, his breathing had shifted. Still shallow, still assisted, but no longer the flat mechanical rhythm of total incapacitation. By 22, his pupils were showing response. "Logan," Emily said, "can you hear me? Blink once." One slow, deliberate blink, stronger than before. "You're going to feel the paralysis lifting in stages. Your limbs first, then your trunk. Don't fight it. Let your body adjust." Another blink. "This is going to take time. The compound has been in your system a long time. You're going to want to move and you're going to need to not." Torres touched her arm briefly. "His BP is climbing." "I see it. That's the reversal working. Keep the line open. If it spikes past 160, we'll back off." She watched the monitor. "He's been compensating for a long time. His body is going to overcorrect." The door to Bay 3 opened. Not one of Lusk's people. Dr. Victor Kane walked in, and he stopped 3 feet past the threshold, and he looked at the room. The tactical gear, the field equipment, the former employee he'd fired 4 hours ago standing at his patient's bedside. And his face went through 4 expressions in rapid sequence before settling on something that was trying to be authoritative and landing somewhere north of alarmed. "What in the hell is happening in my department?" Not a question, an assertion of territory. Lusk turned. She produced the same slim wallet she'd shown the security guard and opened it, and held it at a distance calculated to be readable without being handed over. Kane read it. His jaw tightened. "That doesn't give you the authority to commandeer my patient," he said. "That doesn't give you the authority to bring unauthorized personnel into a clinical setting, and it certainly doesn't," his eyes went to Emily, "authorize a terminated employee to perform medical procedures." "Dr. Kane," Lusk's voice was pleasant in the specific way that had no warmth in it. "I'd suggest you take a moment. I have a brain-dead patient who has been interfered with by someone who doesn't have clinical privileges in this hospital, and I am the attending of record And I want... He's not brain dead. Kane stopped. Emily didn't look up from the IV line she was adjusting. She said it calmly, the way you stated something that had always been true. His pupils are reactive bilaterally. His GCS is improving. He has been conscious and responsive since before I was removed from this floor. She looked up then. I documented all of it. Timestamps in the chart. You can read them. The silence in Bay 3 had a texture to it. Kane's eyes moved from Emily to Logan to the monitors. His face was doing the thing faces did when a story someone had been telling themselves began to run into evidence that didn't support it. For a fraction of a second, just a fraction, she saw it. Not guilt. Calculation. He recovered quickly. That was the thing about Kane. He was fast. Whatever you think you've found, he began. Sir. One of Lusk's operators stepped slightly forward. Not aggressive, just present. He was very large. Kane stopped talking. I'm going to need you to step outside the clinical area, Lusk said. We'll want to speak with you shortly. Please don't go far. It was phrased as a request and structured as a command, and everyone in the room understood which one it was. Kane looked at the operator, at Lusk, at Emily one more time with something she recognized as a specific breed of rage, the kind that came from having your narrative interrupted before you could finish it. And then he walked out. The door closed. Torres exhaled. Emily went back to the IV line. That went well, Torres said. Give it 20 minutes, Emily said. It took 11. Kane reappeared at the door with 2 members of the hospital's legal team and the department head, a quiet man named Garrison who Emily had always respected and who now looked like he'd been pulled out of a morning meeting without warning and wasn't happy about it. There was a brief, low-voiced conversation in the hallway that Emily could see through the glass but not fully hear, and then Garrison came in alone. Emily, he was careful. I need to understand what's happening here. Logan Reed is a military asset who was deliberately incapacitated using a classified nerve compound and brought to this hospital in a state designed to mimic brain death, Emily said. I identified it during my shift last night. Dr. Kane refused the clinical recommendations I made and terminated my employment. These people, she gestured, are here because his life is a national security matter. Garrison looked at Lusk. That's accurate, Lusk said. And you are? Lusk showed him the wallet. He looked at it longer than Kane had. What do you need from us? Garrison said finally. Right now, this room. Controlled access, no unauthorized entry, and somebody needs to restore Carter's access credentials. Garrison looked at Emily. He had the expression of a man doing a rapid reassessment of a situation he'd allowed to develop without paying close enough attention. Emily, Later, she said. Not unkindly. Right now I need the access. He nodded and pulled out his phone. Logan's recovery from the compound was not clean or cinematic. It was slow and painful looking and punctuated by intervals where his body seemed to be fighting the reversal as much as accepting it. His first attempts at voluntary movement were involuntary looking, his hands shaking, his arms not tracking where he was trying to send them. Emily had expected this. The compound suppressed neuromuscular signaling at the junction level, and the restoration of that signaling came back unevenly, like power returning to a grid section by section. She talked to him through it, not performing comfort, just narrating, the way she'd been trained to, giving the patient an anchor to hold on to while their body caught up with the situation. Left hand's tracking better than the right, she said at one point. That's normal. The asymmetry will resolve. A pause. Then, from the gurney, a sound she hadn't heard from him yet. Rough, barely there, like something unused for too long being switched back on. Carter. She looked up. His eyes were open. Actually open. Not the fixed pupil stare, not the performance of nothing. He was looking at the ceiling at first, then slowly, with visible effort, at her. You found the mark, he said. His voice was wrecked, abraded from the tube and the paralysis and however long he'd been locked inside his own body without being able to do anything about it. Third time looking at your arm. Most people miss it. I've seen one before. He processed that. Where? Kandahar, 2019. Doesn't matter. He was quiet for a moment, conserving energy she could see he didn't have much of. Then, how long was I in? We think close to 30 hours total. I can't confirm when it was administered. Something moved across his face. Not quite pain, like something older than pain. 30 hours, he said. She didn't offer anything to make that smaller. There was nothing to offer. 30 hours conscious inside a body that wouldn't respond. In a hospital full of people who'd written him off, the math of that was its own thing, and he could do it himself. You should rest, she said. I need to brief Lusk. You need to rest first. Lusk can wait 15 minutes. Carter? Sergeant Major Reed. She said it in a specific tone, but even not unkind, non-negotiable. Your BP is still swinging and your motor function is at 60% at best. The intelligence you're carrying isn't going anywhere in the next 15 minutes. Lie still. A pause. Then, very quietly, something that might have been the beginning of a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. You haven't changed, he said. She looked at him. We've never met. No. But I've read your file. His eyes closed again. Twice. She decided to leave that alone for the moment and turned back to the monitors. The next 2 hours were controlled chaos, the kind that looked, from the outside, like purposeful movement, but that Emily experienced as a series of problems presenting in sequence, each requiring a decision she didn't have time to fully evaluate before the next one arrived. Logan's stabilization proceeded in uneven stages. The compound's exit from his system was complicated by what Torres quietly identified as a pre-existing cardiac condition that hadn't been in any file she'd seen, which meant the reversal protocol needed adjustment, and the adjustment needed monitoring, and the monitoring kept her at the bedside when she would have preferred to be in the hallway understanding what Lusk's people were finding out. What she gathered, in fragments, Logan had been transporting something. The nature of what he had been transporting was not discussed in terms she could hear, but the response it had generated, the helicopters, the team, the speed, told her the category of it. She'd worked in enough environments where information was compartmentalized to understand that what she wasn't being told was also information. What she was told, he'd been ambushed 26 hours before his arrival at Ravencrest. The ambush had been targeted and precise and had happened at a location that, per Lusk's careful phrasing, shouldn't have been known to anyone outside a very narrow circle. He'd been incapacitated and transported rather than killed, which indicated the ambush's goal had been acquisition rather than elimination. Someone wanted what he was carrying, not him dead. He'd managed to reach Ravencrest through means that Lusk declined to explain, because explaining them would require explaining the contact who'd helped him, and that contact's identity was sensitive. What none of this addressed yet, but what Emily was thinking about steadily throughout the morning, someone had known where he was going. Someone had known the route, the timeline, and the window. Someone had wanted him neutralized and delivered to a place where he could be made to disappear quietly, without noise, with the paperwork trail of a brain death case and a clean withdrawal of care event to close the file. A hospital was a good place for that. The right hospital, the right attending physician, the right circumstances. She was still running that line of thought when Torres appeared at her shoulder with the look she'd come to recognize in the 2 hours she'd known him as the look of someone who had information he wasn't sure how to deliver. What? She said. He held out a tablet. The screen showed a financial transfer record. She could see the structure of it without the specific numbers, the routing pattern of something moved through multiple intermediary accounts. Where did this come from? She said. Lusk's people pulled it. It's preliminary. Nothing confirmed. He paused. It's tagged to a domestic account. The account is registered to a medical professional. Emily looked at the screen. She read the name on the registration. She set the tablet down on the supply cart and took a breath, and looked at the monitors, and let herself absorb what it meant for about 5 seconds. Then she went to find Lusk. She found her in the corridor outside Bay 3, on the phone, with the look of someone managing 4 simultaneous problems while conducting a single conversation. Emily waited. Lusk ended the call and turned. You saw it, Lusk said. Not a question. I saw it. It's preliminary. I understand that. Emily kept her voice level. But if it confirms, then we have a much larger problem than one nurse who got fired. Lusk looked at her directly. Carter, I need you to understand something. This is going to escalate quickly. What happened this morning, but Kane, the termination, that's going to look like a very small thing by comparison to where this is heading. I know. Do you? Lusk's voice didn't harden, but it got more specific. Because where it's heading involves people at levels above Kane who may have been aware of this. And once Logan briefs me on what he was carrying and what the ambush was targeting, the footprint of this gets larger, which means the people who want this contained are going to start moving. Then we need to move faster. Lusk looked at her for a moment with the expression of someone recalibrating an assessment. Your file says you left the service voluntarily, she said. I did. Most people who leave voluntarily don't come back. Most people don't get handed a reason, Emily said. There was a silence. Somewhere down the hall, a phone was ringing. Outside, through the window at the end of the corridor, the rain had slowed to a drizzle, and the parking lot was occupied by 2 military vehicles that hadn't been there at the start of the shift. Logan asked for you, Lusk said. He's ready to brief. Emily nodded and went back to Bay 3. Logan was propped at 20 degrees, her instruction for the lung clearance, and looked, in the clinical fluorescent light, like a man who had been through something that should have finished him and was still visibly working through the fact that it hadn't. The color had come back to his face, which was the compound exiting his system, but the lines around his eyes were deep, and his hands, when they moved, still had a slight tremor on the left side that she was watching. He was not the kind of man who looked comfortable in a hospital bed. The proportions were wrong, not because he was especially large, but because he was the kind of person whose physicality was organized around the assumption of movement, and stillness sat on him like an ill-fitting coat. She checked his monitors first. He waited for her to finish. Report, he said, and it came out in the tone of someone accustomed to receiving them. BP stabilizing. Heart rate still elevated but trending down. Motor function at your hands is around 70% right now. I'd give it another 4 hours for full restoration, maybe 6 given the cardiac complication. She paused. The left tremor is going to be slower. The compound targeted your dominant pathway differently than your secondary. I'm right-handed. I know. He looked at her. The cardiac thing, you knew about it? A beat. It wasn't something I'd disclosed. Your body disclosed it. He was quiet. I'm not going to file anything, she said. That's not my call right now, and I don't think it's the most pressing issue. Agreed. He shifted his weight, testing his arms. I need to tell you something. Okay. The signal I used. The recognition code. He met her eyes. I got it from your file. Your classified file. Which means whoever I work for has had access to your complete service record, including things that aren't in any system you'd know about. Emily was quiet. I used it because I needed to know if you were the person in that file or just someone who shared a name, he said. The compound was already working. I had enough motor function for about 40 seconds of coherent communication, and I had to use it on what mattered. A pause. You answered correctly. I didn't answer. I reacted. Same thing. She looked at him and understood that he was telling her something about the architecture of how she'd been found and why. And she didn't have the full shape of it yet, but she had enough. Who ambushed you? She said. I don't know all of them. I know who coordinated it. He hesitated. Not from uncertainty, she thought, but from the weight of saying it out loud for the first time. Someone with access to my movement schedule. That list is short. How short? Short enough that it's been narrowed to a type of access rather than a name, which is why what I was carrying matters. He looked toward the monitors. I had documentation, encrypted, physical medium, not networked. Proof of a financial arrangement between a domestic contact and a foreign organization. Names, dates, transfer records. Where's it now? I don't know. His jaw tightened. They took it when they took me. That's the assumption. But you don't know for certain. I had a backup protocol. I don't know if it executed. Emily processed this. If the documentation is gone, then everything I know is verbal testimony from a soldier who was found brain dead in a civilian hospital, which is convenient. He looked at her. Except I'm not brain dead, which is also going to be inconvenient for some people. Which people? He was quiet for a long moment. His left hand moved. The tremor, she noted, was worse when he was under stress, which was physiologically expected and also meant he was more stressed than he was letting on. "Carter," he said, "the financial transfer record Lusk's team found this morning." She waited. "Did you see the full routing?" "I saw the account registration." "Did you see the routing?" She looked at him. "No." "The transfer didn't originate from outside the country." He held her gaze. "It originated from a domestic corporate account registered 4 years ago to a medical consulting firm. The firm has one listed officer." Emily stood very still. She knew, before he said it, that she didn't want to hear the name. Not because she was surprised. Somewhere in the back of her mind, the shape of it had been assembling itself for the last 2 hours from all the wrong-feeling pieces. But because hearing it out loud would make it a different kind of real. "Say it," she said. "The consulting firm is registered to a Dr. Victor Kane," Logan said. "And the account received a wire transfer of $2.3 million 48 hours before my ambush." The monitor beside him beeped twice, steady and uninflected, indifferent to what had just been said. Emily didn't speak for a moment. She looked at the monitors, at Logan's face, at her own hands, which were still and had been still since she'd heard it. "He knew you were coming," she said. "Someone told him. Or he found out. I don't know which yet. And he had you brought here specifically. This hospital was on my file as a local civilian facility within the transportation radius of the ambush site. Someone who had access to my file would have known that." His voice was very level. "Someone who knew the protocol for what happens when a soldier with my classification goes down in a civilian area." The implication of that was architectural in its horror. It wasn't just a financial transaction. It was a constructed plan. "Bring him here. Let the attending physician manage the case. Allow the brain death protocol to run its course. Close the file." 30 hours, maybe less, and Logan Reed would have been a statistic with a sealed record and a clean paperwork trail. Except a night shift nurse had been looking at his arm. "There's something else," Logan said. She looked at him. "The mercenary organization that coordinated the ambush," he said. "The intelligence I was carrying was about to expose their domestic contact network. If that documentation is gone and my testimony is the only remaining evidence," he paused, "they're going to want to make sure I don't give it." Emily followed the logic where it went. "They're going to come here," she said. "They may already know I'm awake. Kane. Kane's been in the building this whole time." Logan's eyes met hers, and she saw in them the same calculation she could feel happening in herself. The rapid mapping of vulnerability, access, exits, timeline. "Lusk needs to know," he said. "Right now." Emily was already moving toward the door. She was 3 steps into the hallway when she saw it. At the far end of the corridor, near the stairwell exit, a figure in hospital maintenance coveralls moving against the flow of the morning foot traffic. Walking toward the trauma bay, not away from it. Moving with the particular economy of someone who knew where they were going and didn't want to be noticed going there. She'd seen that walk before. Not the person, the walk. She turned back and hit the door of Bay 3 hard enough to make Torres spin around from the equipment case. "Close this room," she said. "Lock it down. Right now." Torres moved without asking why. That was the thing about people with the right training. They read tone before they processed words. She pulled out her phone and called Lusk, and Lusk picked up on the first ring, and Emily said, "Stairwell B on the trauma floor. Someone's coming." She heard Lusk relay it. Heard the change in movement from the room at the end of the hall she'd seen Lusk enter 10 minutes ago. And then, from the far end of the corridor, the maintenance coverall figure stopped walking. He'd seen her. For a fraction of a second, they were across 40 feet of fluorescent hallway, looking at each other, and she could see him making the same calculation she was making, and she was already moving. The stairwell door opened. Not the same door. The one on her side of the floor, and the man who came through it was not one of Lusk's operators. He was average height, average build, wearing a hospital visitor badge and carrying a paper cup of coffee that he hadn't touched. That was the tell. The coffee was a prop, and props meant a cover, and covers meant intent. Emily had 3 seconds before he cleared the stairwell door and saw her position relative to Bay 3. She used 2 of them to look at his hands, his jacket, the slight forward lean of his weight that said he was ready to accelerate, and then she used the third to move. Not toward him, toward the wall. She pulled the emergency crash cart from its alcove as she passed it, not upending it, just repositioning it into the corridor at an angle that narrowed the hallway by half and put an obstacle between him and the bay, and then she was past it, and he was past the door, and they were 20 feet apart in a hospital corridor at 7:43. Morning. With Weston, the charge nurse, frozen at the far desk, and Priya visible through the glass of a patient room making the face of someone who didn't know if she was watching an emergency or something else entirely. The man stopped. He looked at Emily. He looked at the crash cart. He looked at the door to Bay 3 with its closed blinds and the very slight rectangular silhouette of Torres visible through the frosted glass panel. He made a decision. He dropped the coffee cup and reached. Emily was already inside his reach. She'd been trained in an era before the military started calling it by formal names, when it was simply what you did in close environments where a firearm was a liability, fast, functional, aimed at ending the threat before it could fully materialize rather than after. She didn't think through it. The body thought through it. She caught his wrist before the jacket could open, stepped into his center of gravity, used his own reaching momentum to bring him forward and down. He was trained. She felt that immediately. The counter-resistance, the attempt to recover his base. But he'd been moving to his dominant side, and she'd already taken it, and the floor of a hospital corridor is not a forgiving surface when someone with the right leverage puts you on it. He hit hard. She had his wrist pinned and her knee at the base of his shoulder blades, and her weight distributed in a way that would take him longer to reverse than she was going to give him. "Weston!" she called, not loud. "Get everyone off this floor. Not running. Walking. Now." She heard Weston make a sound and then move. She heard the murmur of his voice beginning the evacuation she'd asked for. The man under her was breathing hard and making small testing movements with his free hand, assessing angles, and she could feel him calculating. He was good. Not good enough, but good. "Where's your partner?" she said. He said nothing. "The other one was coming from the stairwell at the opposite end, so you're coordinated, which means there's communication between you." She pressed down slightly. "I'm asking who's listening." Still nothing. The stairwell door at the far end burst open. Lusk's people came through it first, which meant they'd intercepted the maintenance coverall before he'd reached the bay, and the brief commotion Emily could hear, a controlled impact, two voices, the specific percussion of a takedown, suggested the interception had been conclusive. Two operators appeared at the near end of the hall. One of them took over from Emily without a word, transitioning her out of the position with the practiced handoff of people who'd done this exchange before. Emily stood up and stepped back, and her hands were shaking slightly. Adrenaline, not fear, the body burning off what it had used, and she pressed them flat against her thighs for 3 seconds until the tremor stopped. Lusk appeared from the far stairwell at a fast walk that wasn't quite a run. "You good?" she said. "Yes. 2 of them. Probably more outside." "We have 2 on the exterior perimeter. We're looking for a third." Lusk scanned the corridor. "The bay's secure?" Torres locked it. "I need you inside with Logan. We're moving him." "He's not ready to move." "I know, but staying isn't safer." Lusk's eyes were already past her, managing 4 things at once. "How far can he go?" Emily ran the math. His BP had been stabilizing but was still inconsistent. His motor function was incomplete. Moving a patient in active neurological recovery from a nerve compound in a non-clinical vehicle without the ability to monitor and adjust was a ground floor exit, no stairs, horizontal transfer only, and I need Torres and the field kit in the same vehicle. Done. 2 minutes. Emily went back to Bay 3. Logan was sitting up when she came in, not because Torres had permitted it, judging by Torres's expression, and had the monitoring leads partially disconnected from his chest. "Don't," she said. "I heard it," he said. "The hallway. I handled it." "How many?" 2 confirmed inside, more outside. She moved to the monitors. "You need to lie back down. I mean it. Carter, your BP just spiked 20 points from you sitting up. If it goes higher and you have a cardiac event in a vehicle without a crash cart, I cannot help you." She put her hand on his shoulder. not a gesture of comfort, a clinical instruction made physical. Lie down and let me move you safely, or stay upright and roll the dice. Which is it? He looked at her with the expression of a man who was accustomed to making the calls and was being told he didn't get to make this one. He lay back down. "Thank you," she said, and started reconnecting the leads. The transfer took 4 minutes rather than 2, because the elevator was occupied and the alternate route to the ground floor required navigating a supply corridor that Torres hadn't been briefed on, and Emily had to lead because she knew the building. She walked ahead of the gurney with her ID badge in one hand and her phone in the other, and an awareness of every doorway and corner that she hadn't needed in 14 months of working this hospital, but that came back to her now with the specific reliability of things that had been built in under pressure. They came out a service exit into the gray morning and a black SUV that materialized from the parking structure at a pace that suggested it had been waiting. The transfer from gurney to vehicle was exactly as non-ideal as she'd expected. Logan's left side wasn't tracking properly. He couldn't assist with the lateral move. Torres dropped the portable monitor once and had to recover it, and the vehicle's interior was not designed for a supine patient with an active IV line. But they got it done, and she climbed in and pulled the door, and the SUV moved before she'd fully settled her weight. She looked at Logan in the dim interior and checked the line and checked his color and checked the portable monitor Torres had resecured to the headrest. "Doing okay?" she said. "Define okay." "Alive and declining to have a cardiac event." "Then, yes." Outside the tinted windows, Ashridge was doing its morning. Traffic, pedestrians, the ordinary visual texture of a city that had no idea what was moving through it. Emily tracked the route without meaning to, the ingrained habit of noting turns and landmarks, and understood they were heading northwest, out of the hospital district, toward the city's edge. "Where are we going?" she asked Torres. "Lusk will brief." He was watching Logan's monitor. "You did good back there." She didn't respond to that. She was looking at her hands again. The tremor was gone now, which was fine, but there was a bruising starting across her right knuckles that she hadn't noticed during the engagement and was noticing now. She'd hit something, the corridor wall when she'd gone for his wrist, probably. She flexed her fingers. Nothing broken. Logan was watching her. "Kandahar, 2019, he said. "You were attached to the 4th group. Medic first class. You pulled 3 people out of a compound that was actively on fire." She looked at him. "That's in my file?" "There's a commendation in your file. The incident description is redacted." He paused. "I filled in the rest from other sources." "Which sources?" "People who were there." She absorbed that. One of the people who'd been there, she knew, was dead. 2 of the others she hadn't spoken to in years. The 4th, she didn't know where the 4th was now. "Why were you reading my file?" she said. "Because someone recommended you," Logan said, 6 months ago, before any of this. She waited. "The people I work for were building a shortlist for a specialized unit, medical personnel with field experience and other qualifications." He watched her face. "Your name came up 3 times from 3 independent sources. I'm a floor nurse at a trauma center." "You were." The SUV made a turn and the city began to thin, the buildings spacing out, the commercial density giving way to the kind of industrial residential margin that cities had at their edges. "Logan," she said, "the documentation you were carrying, if it's been taken, there's a backup." She looked at him sharply. "A secondary carrier, not networked. Physical medium." He paused. "I don't know if they found it. The secondary protocol was designed to be independent of the primary. If the primary was compromised, the secondary would route to a separate location." "Where?" "I don't know the exact location. It's routed through a handler who I'm not in direct contact with. It's designed that way. If I'm compromised, I can't inadvertently give up the location." "So we have documentation that may or may not exist at a location we don't know." "Yes." "And Kane is still in the hospital." "For now." She turned that over. Kane was still in the hospital, in the building they'd just evacuated, with Lusk's people controlling the space and the local authorities, presumably having been notified of something. She didn't know the cover story Lusk had used, but there would be one, because there was always one. And the question of how long he could be held in that building without sufficient legal mechanism to charge him was a question she didn't have the answer to. If he walks, she said. He won't walk. Lusk has enough for a temporary hold. The financial record is preliminary, but it's sufficient. Logan's voice was careful. The problem is the window. Once the organization that sent those two people knows the attempt failed, they're going to start destroying evidence. Kane included. She understood the shape of that. He's a liability now. He was always a liability. He just didn't know it. Logan shifted his weight, and she saw the line tug and reached over to stabilize it. The people who paid him $2.3 million did not do so because they trusted him. They did it because he was useful. He's no longer useful. Emily sat with that for a moment, watching the monitor, watching his face, watching the city become the edge of the city through the window. Someone needs to get to him before they do, she said. Lusk knows. Does she have enough people? She has enough for today. He closed his eyes briefly. The question is whether today is enough time. The SUV turned again onto a road Emily didn't recognize, and she let herself look out the window for a moment at the pale morning sky and the flat land opening up ahead of them, and she thought about 14 months of arriving early and leaving late and keeping her hands at her sides and saying nothing, and how all of that had led in a straight, if indirect line, to this vehicle moving northwest through the edge of Ashridge with a half-recovered soldier and a field medic kit and a list of problems that was still growing. She looked back at Logan. His eyes were open. He was watching her with the particular focused quality of someone who was managing pain and not advertising it. The unit they were building the shortlist for, she said. Yes. What kind of unit? The kind that does what happened in that hospital tonight. He held her gaze. Finds the things that shouldn't be findable. Keeps alive the people who shouldn't be keep-aliveable. Operates in the space between civilian and military where neither set of rules applies cleanly. She was quiet. The offer was going to be formal, he said. 6 weeks from now, through proper channels. This was not the planned circumstances. No, she agreed. Emily. He used her first name for the first time, and the unexpectedness of it made her look at him directly. The person who recommended you most strongly, the one whose name appears on the file first. He paused. I'm looking at her. She stared at him. I recommended myself? You documented everything. Every incident, every refused recommendation, every time-stamped record of Kane ignoring a clinical intervention that should have been made. You were building a record, a beat. Whether you knew it or not, you were making an argument. She looked at her hands, at the bruised knuckles, at the IV line she'd been maintaining for the past 2 hours. We're here, Torres said from the front. The SUV stopped. Emily looked out the window at a 2-story structure set back from a gravel drive. Not a cabin, not a facility, something in between, the kind of building that had been built to be forgettable and had succeeded. 2 operators she didn't recognize were already at the vehicle doors. She got out and looked back at the building, at the flat sky, at the distance between here and the city behind them. Her phone buzzed. Lusk. She answered. We have a problem, Lusk said, and her voice had a quality Emily hadn't heard in it yet. Not alarm, but its near neighbor. Kane? Kane's gone. A pause. He walked out the service exit 17 minutes ago. We had eyes on the front. He went out the back. Another pause. His phone is off. His car is still in the lot. Emily looked at the structure in front of her, at the gravel drive, at the distance she'd been trying to calculate since the SU-5 had turned off the main road. Lusk, she said. Does anyone have eyes on the secondary protocol handler, Logan's backup documentation? Silence for 2 seconds. Why? Because if Kane knows about the backup, he doesn't. He shouldn't. He sold access to Logan's file, Emily said. The primary file, which means whoever he sold it to may have had access to the secondary protocol architecture. She kept her voice level. If they know where the documentation is being routed, she heard Lusk relay something quickly, a controlled burst of words to someone else in the room, and then silence. Then, Emily, we've lost contact with the handler. The gravel crunched behind her. She turned. Torres was standing at the vehicle door with Logan's portable monitor in his hand and an expression that had lost whatever neutral professional quality it had held all morning. "His BP just crashed," Torres said. "He's seizing." Emily was running before the sentence ended, and somewhere behind her, in the middle distance between this gravel drive and the city she'd left, something she couldn't see yet was already moving toward them. She hit the SUV door with both hands, and Torres stepped back to give her room, and she was at Logan's side before she'd consciously decided to move. He was seizing. Not the full tonic-clonic she'd feared from the word, but a focal event, his left arm jerking in a repetitive arc, his jaw clenched, his eyes deviated right. Post-ictal wasn't going to be available to her here. She needed to manage the event and protect the airway and keep him from aspirating, and she needed to do it in the back of an SUV with a field kit and Torres and nothing else. "Suction," she said. "And the Ativan. The 1 milligram vials, not the 2. Torres had it in her hand before she finished. She administered it clean, watched the clock on her phone, watched his arm, watched his face. 40 seconds? 50. The jerking slowed. 90 seconds. It stopped. Logan's breathing was rough and uneven, and his color was bad. Grayish around the mouth, which was the vasovagal component of the event fighting with the BP crash. And Emily got the portable monitor repositioned and read the numbers and felt the particular sensation of multiple bad things being true at once and having to prioritize them in order rather than all at once. BP, 84/52. That was the crash. Heart rate, 44. Too slow. The cardiac complication she'd noted earlier, the one he hadn't disclosed, had been waiting for exactly this kind of physiological insult. The seizure had dumped his already compromised autonomic function over the edge. "Atropine," she said. "I have 0.5. Give me 0.5 and draw another." She administered the first dose and watched, waited. The heart rate climbed, slowly, unevenly, the kind of climb that felt like coaxing something that had decided to stop. "Come on," she said, not to Torres, not really to anyone. 51, 56, 60. The color in Logan's face shifted, still not good, but not getting worse. She sat back against the vehicle door and took a breath that she'd been deferring for approximately 3 minutes and let herself have it. Logan's eyes opened, unfocused at first, then tracking, finding her face. "Seizure," she said, before he could ask. He processed that. She could see him running the implications. "Atropine? 0.5. I have another dose ready. Your heart rate is 60 and climbing." She watched the monitor. "Your BP is starting to recover. Give it 2 minutes before you try to talk." Closed his eyes. 2 minutes, or something close to it, passed. "The handler," he said. Lusk said, "I know. We'll deal with it. Emily." His voice was rough from the seizure, the words coming out with effort. "The backup documentation. If the handler's been compromised, then we work from what we have, which is you, the financial transfer record, and 14 months of nursing documentation that I filed in triplicate." She looked at him directly. "That's not nothing." He was quiet for a moment. Outside, she heard gravel under boots. Lusk's people establishing a perimeter around the building, she assumed, doing what they could with what they had. "You don't seem scared," he said. "I'm scared," she said. "I just don't have time for it right now." She got him out of the SUV carefully, with Torres on one side and one of the perimeter operators on the other, and into the building through a side door that opened into a room that had been set up as a functional but minimal medical space. A cot, a portable light, equipment cases that Torres had apparently been expecting because he moved to them immediately with the ease of someone following a prearranged plan. The building was 3 rooms on the ground floor and a staircase she didn't go up. A kitchen that had been converted into a communication space. She saw the satellite equipment and a second operator she didn't know running signals. The front room was where Lusk was, standing over a folding table with a laptop and a phone, and the particular posture of someone managing a situation that was currently managing her back. Emily put Logan on the cot, connected the monitor, established the line, ran through vitals that were, slowly, stubbornly, normalizing. Then she went to find Lusk. "Handler's name was Prentice," Lusk said without looking up. "We made contact 40 minutes ago. He'd just received the secondary documentation package. The routing completed before whatever happened. She looked up. We don't know where he is now. His last GPS position was a rest stop on the 720 miles east of here. That's 15 minutes away. We have a team moving. Oh, Emily looked at the map on the laptop. A sectional of the area, with markers Emily read as positions and route lines in 2 colors. Kane, she said. Still dark. Lusk's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He had a head start. We have the phone carrier working on a tower log, but that takes time. We don't... Her phone rang. She answered it, listened for 10 seconds, said copy, and put it down. Her expression had changed. Kane just tried to use a credit card, she said, 40 minutes ago. Gas station, Route 12, 30 miles northwest. She looked at the map. He's not running. Emily studied the route. 30 miles northwest. She thought about what was northwest, and what a man who was no longer useful to the people who'd paid him might be trying to do, and where someone might go if they decided that what they needed most was something that gave them leverage. He's going to the handler, she said. Lusk looked at her. If Kane knows about the secondary documentation, if whoever paid him told him about the backup protocol, then he knows where it's going. He sold Logan's file. Maybe he sold more. Emily kept her voice level. He's not running from this. He's trying to get in front of it. If he can get to Prentice before your team does, Lusk was already on the phone. Emily went back to Logan. He was conscious and alert and had the monitoring leads positioned where they'd be most accurate, which meant he'd been adjusting them himself while she was out of the room, which meant he was feeling better than he looked and was not willing to admit it. I need you to tell me everything you know about the secondary protocol, she said. He looked at her. That's a classified briefing. We think Kane is heading for Prentice. A pause. Then, sit down. She sat on the edge of the cot, and he told her, in the clipped, precise language of someone who'd been trained to brief quickly, what the secondary protocol involved. The documentation, physical medium, encrypted drive, not networked, had been routed through Prentice as the failsafe. Prentice's role was receipt and transfer to a second point, a lawyer retained by the unit's oversight body, who would then route it to a federal contact. The chain was designed to require multiple compressions before anyone with authority to act on it had the material in hand. So Prentice received it, Emily said, but he hasn't transferred it yet. Probably not. The transfer window is 24 hours after receipt. Then the documentation is still with him. Yes, and if Kane gets there first, then Kane either takes it or destroys it, and the documentation chain is broken, and what we have left is the financial transfer record, which is preliminary and which Kane's attorneys will spend 6 months attacking, and my testimony. A beat. Which is worth something, but not enough. Emily looked at the monitor, looked at his hands, which were steadier than they'd been an hour ago, looked at the space between what they had and what they needed. Torres, she called. He appeared in the doorway. What's our vehicle situation? He blinked. We have the SUV and a second vehicle that came with the building. Do we have anyone who can drive me to Route 7 in the next 10 minutes? Torres looked at her, looked at Logan, looked back at her. I'll drive, he said. She turned to Logan. Stay horizontal, don't adjust the leads again. If anything changes, tell the operator in the front room and tell him loudly. Logan caught her wrist, his left hand, the one that had been tremoring, steadier now. Not restraining, just present. Carter, he said. Prentice is ex-military. He knows how to handle himself. So does Kane. She looked at his hand on her wrist. And Kane's had a 40-minute head start and a very strong motivation. He let go. She went. The drive to Route 7 took 11 minutes, with Torres running lights the vehicle technically didn't have but was equipped with regardless. Emily spent 8 of those minutes on the phone with Lusk, who was coordinating the team response and doing it in the tone of someone who was managing several simultaneous developments, most of which she was not sharing in full. What she did share, a satellite phone contact for Prentice, which had been tried 3 times without answer. A vehicle registration linked to the consulting firm that had received Kane's payment, a dark gray sedan, not his personal vehicle, which explained how he'd walked out the hospital's service exit without triggering the plate recognition on the lot. and a contact at the federal prosecutor's office who had been read in on the operation at 6 a.m. and was currently in a building 22 miles away doing paperwork that had very specific implications for what happened next. What Emily understood from the shape of what Lusk wasn't saying, there was a timing problem. The federal mechanism required the documentation. Without Prentice completing the transfer, the legal architecture needed to move on Kane was incomplete. A financial transfer record and a soldier's testimony were evidence of something, but evidence of something was not the same as a prosecutable case at the level this needed to reach. They needed the drive. The rest stop on Route 7 appeared through the windshield as a low structure with a parking area. Half a dozen vehicles, a tractor-trailer at the far end, the morning light thin and flat over all of it. Torres pulled in and Emily was already scanning. Gray sedan, East Lot. She saw it before he finished stopping. She was out of the vehicle before he'd fully stopped. She didn't run. Running in a parking lot was noise and attention, and she needed neither. But she moved at the pace of someone who had somewhere to be and knew where it was. She found Prentice at a picnic table behind the building, out of the line of sight from the road. 60s, compact, with the bearing that didn't leave people even when everything else had. He was alive. That was the first thing she clocked. Sitting upright, one hand flat on the table, the other inside his jacket. He had a cut above his left eye that was still bleeding. He looked up when she came around the corner and his hand inside the jacket tightened. "Lusk sent me," Emily said. "Carter." A pause. He read her face for 3 seconds. "He was here," Prentice said. "Kane. 15 minutes ago, maybe 20. He took his hand out of his jacket. No weapon. He'd been checking a wound on his ribs, she now saw, his shirt lifted on the right side where the impact had been. He had someone with him, someone I didn't see until he was already out of the car." "Did he get the drive?" Prentice looked at her with an expression she'd seen on people who'd done something they didn't know if it was smart or not, and were waiting to find out. "No," he said. But he tried. He shifted his weight, and she saw him absorb the pain of whatever rib situation he was working with. "I need a hospital." "I know. Let me see." She crouched beside him and lifted the shirt and looked at the damage. 2 ribs, minimum, and a bruising pattern consistent with a blunt impact. A kick, probably, by someone who knew where to put it. Not life-threatening, but significantly painful and potentially complicated if a fragment shifted. "The drive," she said. "In the vehicle. I didn't have it on me." He said it with the dry understatement of someone who'd made a decision under pressure and was cautiously satisfied with it. "He searched me. Didn't find it. Then his associate decided to make a point before they left." "Do you know which way they went?" "North, fast." She stood and called Lusk, gave her the update in 4 sentences, heard Lusk relay it to the team, heard the quality of Lusk's voice change when Emily told her the drive was intact. Torres appeared around the corner of the building, took one look at Prentice and opened the bag he'd apparently had the presence of mind to bring from the vehicle. "Can you transfer the drive to someone right now?" Emily asked Prentice. "Is there a mechanism for that, or does the chain require a specific recipient?" "There's an emergency transfer protocol. I need to initiate it with the oversight contact." He was already reaching for his phone. "I was waiting because the standard transfer is cleaner legally, but do the emergency transfer," Emily said. He looked at her. "Kane is 20 minutes north and moving. He didn't get the drive, but he knows where it is now, which means the organization he's working for knows where it is. You can complete the proper chain transfer from a hospital bed with an attorney on a phone call. Right now, we need the material out of this rest stop." Prentice held her gaze for a moment with the evaluating quality of someone deciding whether to take direction from a person they'd just met, then nodded and started making the call. Torres was doing temporary field dressing on his ribs, efficient and practiced, talking him through it in the low professional voice he apparently used for everything. Emily walked back around to the front of the building, to the line of sight where she could see both the parking lot and the road, and she stood in the thin morning light and tried to hold all the moving pieces in sequence. The drive was here. Prentice was initiating emergency transfer. Kane was north and moving. Lusk had a team converging on his last known trajectory. Logan was at the building, stable but not recovered. The federal contact was in a building 22 miles away, waiting for the documentation that was, right now, transmitting from a satellite phone at a rest stop picnic table to a server she'd never know the location of. She realized her hands had stopped shaking. She wasn't sure when that had happened. Her phone rang. Lusk. Our team intercepted a dark gray sedan on Route 12 North, 11 miles from your position. Lusk's voice was controlled. Kane was the driver. He's in custody. Emily closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. And his associate? Fled on foot. We have people on it. A pause. The federal contact has received the documentation transfer. They're reviewing now. Another pause. Longer, with something underneath it. Emily, it's enough. The review attorney says it's enough. She stood with the phone against her ear and the pale sky overhead and traffic moving past on Route 7 in the morning like nothing was different, like the air didn't feel the way it felt after something that had been wrong for a long time stopped being wrong. Okay, she said. Can you bring Prentice in? We'll need his statement. Torres is with him. He needs ribs imaged, but he can be transported. Copy. Come back to the building first. Logan? Lusk paused. Logan's asking for you. Emily looked at the road for a moment, at the distance between here and there, at the sky, which was clearing in the west, the first time in several hours she'd noticed anything about the sky. Tell him I'm coming, she said. She was halfway back to Torres and Prentice when the second call came in. Not Lusk this time. A number she didn't recognize, local area code. She answered, Is this Emily Carter? A man's voice. Not military, not official. Something else in the register of it. Something that took her a moment to place. A journalist's cadence, careful and quick at the same time. Who is this? My name is Owen Marsh. I'm a reporter with the Ashridge Chronicle. I've been following something for about 3 weeks, and I think... A pause. I think it intersects with some things that happened at Ravencrest Medical Center this morning. Emily stopped walking. I'm not in a position to speak to press right now, she said carefully. I understand. I'm not asking you to. I'm asking you to listen for 30 seconds. Another pause. I have a source inside Ravencrest who has been documenting financial irregularities in the Department of Trauma Surgery for approximately 8 months. I have records, not from this morning, from months ago, showing payments routed through a medical consulting firm to a shell account in the Cayman chain. He was speaking quickly, controlled. I was about to go to publication this week. Then I got a call this morning from my source saying that something had happened, that a patient had been removed, that the physician at the center of what I'd been investigating had left the building. Emily was very still. My source's name is Priya Anand, Marsh said. She said if I could reach Emily Carter, Carter would know what to do with what I have. Priya, who had brought her the termination letter in the rain, who had promised to document everything, who had apparently been doing considerably more than that for considerably longer. Emily stood on the edge of the Route 7 parking lot with the sky clearing overhead and 8 months of a journalist's records on the other end of the phone, and understood that the shape of what Kane had done was larger than Logan's ambush, larger than a single payment, larger than one conversation in a rain-soaked hospital parking lot at 2:47 in the morning. Mr. Marsh, she said, are you still in Ashridge? Yes. Don't publish anything yet. Give me 2 hours. A pause. I've been sitting on this for 3 weeks. 2 hours, she said. What I can give you in exchange is a story that's larger than what you have. Significantly larger. She let that sit. Do we have 2 hours? A longer pause. 2 hours, he said. She hung up and looked at Torres, who had appeared at the corner of the building and was watching her with the expression of someone who had been catching fragments of a context he didn't fully have. We need to move, she said. Prentice ready? Ready. Then let's go. She got back in the vehicle and checked her phone and looked at the route back to the building and thought about Priya, who had been quiet and careful and watching for 8 months while Emily had been quiet and careful and watching for 14 months, and how neither of them had known the other was doing it, and how that was either a tragedy or a redundancy that had just turned into something useful. The vehicle moved. The rest stop disappeared in the side mirror. 20 minutes later, She was back in the building, and Logan was sitting up on the cot. She noted with the specific irritation of someone whose medical instructions had been ignored, and his color was better than it had been all morning. He looked at her when she came in. "Prentice?" he said. "Safe. Ribs. Drive transferred." She moved to the monitor out of reflex and checked the numbers. "You're sitting up." "I'm sitting up," he agreed. "I told you. I know what you told me." He said it without apology, but without arrogance. "I needed to hear the room." She looked at the numbers. BP at 112/71, better than it had been all day. Heart rate 68 and steady. The compound continuing its slow retreat from his system with the grudging progress of something that had been designed to be hard to reverse. "Lusk told me about the transfer," he said, "and Kane. The federal contact has the documentation. Kane is in custody." She pulled the stool Torres used and sat down, because her legs had been informing her for the last hour that she'd been asking a lot of them. "There's something else." She told him about Marsh, about Priya, about 8 months of records she hadn't known existed. Logan listened with the quality of focus she was coming to understand was how he processed things. Very still, very present, nothing wasted on reaction until he had the full picture. She was building a parallel record, he said, without knowing what any of the rest of this was. He stopped. "That's actually what broke this open. Not the military operation, not the documentation I was carrying." He looked at her. "A junior doctor who decided to write things down. She's a second-year resident." Still. Emily looked at the monitor, at her hands, at the room, which was spare and practical, and nothing like the trauma floor she'd been working 14 hours ago. "The journalist has records going back 8 months, she said. "That predates the ambush. That predates the payment we found. If his records hold, then Kane's arrangement was longer standing than a single transaction." Logan's voice was careful. "Which means the organization he was working with had domestic access for at least 8 months before they targeted me." She followed that. "And whoever approved the arrangement, whoever was coordinating on their side, has been active for at least that long." He met her eyes. "The federal contact is going to need to know about Marsh's records." "I told him 2 hours. That's enough time." She nodded. And then, because she was tired and the adrenaline had finally finished metabolizing, and she was sitting on a stool in a room that smelled like field kit antiseptic, and the day had started approximately 100 years ago, she put her elbows on her knees and looked at the floor for a moment. "Hey," Logan said. She looked up. "You're allowed to have done something difficult," he said. "It doesn't have to look a specific way." She looked at him, at the monitoring leads she'd placed and the IV line she'd managed, and the sequence of events that had started with a puncture mark the size of a pinhead on a man's inner forearm at 2:47 in the morning. "I know," she said. Her phone buzzed. "Lusk." She answered. "Kane is being transported to federal holding," Lusk said. "The prosecutor's office is moving. They expect to have enough for initial charges filed within the hour." A pause. "Emily, there's one more thing." She waited. "The associate who fled on foot from the sedan," Lusk said. "We have ID from the hospital footage. The man in the maintenance coveralls." Another pause. "He's not a mercenary. He's a physician." Emily went very still. "His name is Dr. Walter Foss," Lusk said. "He was Kane's department associate at Ravencrest for 2 years before he transferred to Mercy General 6 months ago. He has a second identity registered under a different name that our team just pulled, and that identity has connections." "What kind of connections?" "The organization kind." A silence. "The kind that means Kane wasn't the top of this. He was a layer." Emily looked at Logan. He was watching her face. "Lusk," Emily said. "How many layers are we talking about?" The pause before Lusk answered was exactly 1 second too long. "We're still counting," Lusk said. "We're still counting," Lusk said, and then the line went quiet in the way that meant she was already moving on to the next problem. Emily lowered the phone. Logan was watching her with the stillness of someone who had received bad news in enough configurations to know how to sit with it before reacting to it. "How many layers?" he said. Not a question. "She doesn't know yet." He absorbed that. Outside, through the single window in the room, The sky had gone from pale gray to something approaching actual morning, the kind of light that arrived after a long night and looked almost aggressive in its ordinateness, the sun apparently unaware that the ground beneath it was considerably more complicated than it looked. "Foss," Logan said. "Walter Foss." "You know him?" "I know the name." He shifted his weight on the cot. "Not from Kane's context. From a briefing 8 months ago. He appeared in the margins of something, a financial trace that didn't go anywhere conclusive. He was noted and filed, and the trail went cold." A pause. "He was at Mercy General 6 months ago." Mercy General has a trauma contract with the county, which means access to patient intake records for anyone brought in by county emergency services. His voice had taken on the quality of something assembling in real time, including anonymous military admissions. Emily looked at him. "He was the backup plan. If I hadn't flagged you at Ravencrest, the protocol would have routed me to Mercy General next, as a transfer case." He said it without inflection, but she heard what was underneath it. He was positioned. The architecture of it was meticulous and patient, and it was the patience that made it ugly. Not a rushed conspiracy, but a built one, layered over months, with contingencies and cover identities, and people positioned at the right facilities at the right times. Someone had spent a long time on this. Someone who understood how institutions worked and how to hide inside them. "Lusk needs everything you have on the briefing where Foss appeared," Emily said. "She'll get it." He paused. "But Emily, the layers issue, that's not going to resolve today. That's a weeks-long investigation, probably longer. What resolves today is Kane, the immediate threat, the documentation." He looked at her steadily. "Don't let what's still unknown pull focus from what we've actually secured." She recognized what he was doing, not minimizing, not deflecting, but applying the specific kind of triage she'd been applying to him medically all morning. One thing at a time, in order of what will kill you fastest. "The journalist," she said, "Marsh, his records go back 8 months. Which means they start around when Foss appeared in that briefing. Which means Priya was watching Kane during the same period that Foss was being positioned at Mercy General." She paused. "And neither of them knew about the other. Parallel pressure from 2 directions Kane couldn't see." Logan was quiet for a moment. "That's not strategy. That's 2 people independently deciding that something was wrong and doing something about it." Emily thought about that, about what it meant that the thing that had ultimately cracked this open wasn't an operation or a classified briefing or a military asset. It was a second-year resident writing down what she saw, and a floor nurse who'd learned, a long time ago, to look at places people didn't expect to be looked at. She called Marsh back at the 90-minute mark and gave him the contact information for the federal prosecutor's office. She told him to present his records directly and to tell them Emily Carter had referred him. She did not tell him the full shape of what she knew, because some of it wasn't hers to tell, and some of it hadn't solidified yet. What she told him was enough. He was quiet for a moment after she finished. "The nurse they fired," he said. "That was you." "That was me." "Kane fired you at, 6 a.m.? And by 9 a.m. you'd—" "Mr. Marsh," she said, "call the prosecutor's office." She heard what might have been a short, disbelieving sound, and then he said he would, and she ended the call. The next 6 hours were administrative in the way that the aftermath of significant events was always administrative. The mechanics of consequence arriving in the shape of forms and phone calls, and people who needed information delivered in specific formats. Lusk coordinated most of it from the building's communications room, with the focused efficiency of someone who'd run these kinds of operations before and knew that the post-action period required a different kind of stamina than the action itself. Torres transported Prentice to a medical facility with a federal security detail and stayed to ensure the chain of custody on the drive transfer was documented correctly. Emily stayed with Logan. She stayed because his vitals needed monitoring, and because the cardiac complication required another 2 hours of observation before she'd be comfortable declaring him stable, and because, she admitted this to herself without drama, she wasn't ready to walk out into whatever came next without knowing he was going to be all right. That was a human reason, not a clinical one, and she allowed herself to have it. He slept for 3 of those 6 hours, which was the best thing his body could do for itself. and she sat nearby and read the updates Lusk sent in short, precise texts and let the picture assemble itself piece by piece. Kane was processed and in federal holding by noon. The initial charges, conspiracy, obstruction, and accessory to assault on a federal asset, with more to follow, were filed at 1:17 p.m. His attorney, contacted by 1:30, immediately began the particular kind of legal maneuvering that told Emily the attorney had known something like this was possible. You didn't retain that kind of attorney on a trauma surgeon's salary without anticipating that you might need them. Walter Foss was apprehended at 2:44 p.m. at a bus station 40 miles north. He'd made it further than Kane, which said something about his training, but not far enough, which said something about Lusk's people. His second identity, the one with the organizational connections Lusk had mentioned, opened an investigative thread that the federal team started pulling immediately. The thread was long. Emily gathered this from the quality of Lusk's updates, which became less frequent as the afternoon progressed, which meant the scope of what they were finding was requiring more of her attention, not less. Priya Anand's records, 8 months of them, meticulous and specific, and cross-referenced in a way that suggested she'd taught herself to document evidence rather than just observations, were delivered to the federal prosecutor's office by 3 p.m. via Marsh, who apparently arrived in person rather than sending them electronically, which Emily thought was exactly the right instinct. Physical records had a different weight than digital transmission when you were trying to demonstrate the sustained, deliberate nature of what someone had been doing. At 4:30, Logan woke up. He lay still for a moment in the way people lay still when they're taking inventory, assessing what works and what doesn't, and what the costs of the last 18 hours have been. Then he pushed himself upright, slowly, with less assistance from his arms than he'd needed 6 hours ago. Emily was already at the monitor. "Don't," he said. "I'm checking your BP." "I know what you're doing." "Then stop moving until I've done it." He stopped moving. She checked it. 124/78. Heart rate 71. The numbers of a man who'd been through something significant and whose body was stubbornly and imperfectly coming out the other side of it. "Clean enough?" she said. "Enough to sit up." "Enough to sit up." She sat back on the stool. "Kane's been charged. Foss is in custody. The documentation is with the federal contact and has been reviewed." She watched his face. "It's done." He was quiet for a moment. She'd expected something. Relief, maybe, or the specific exhaustion that came after sustained tension finally broke. What she saw was more complicated than either of those. The face of someone who had carried something a long time and had put it down and wasn't yet sure what it felt like to not be carrying it. "The layers," he said, "still being counted. That's going to take time." "I know." He looked at the window. "Prentice? Fractured ribs, 2 confirmed. He'll be fine." "Good." A pause. "He's been doing this for 23 years. He didn't deserve—" He'd probably say he knew the risks. "Probably." Logan looked at her. "What about you?" She blinked. "What about me?" "You were fired this morning. Your clinical credentials were suspended. You performed medical procedures in a non-sanctioned environment on an unauthorized basis. You physically engaged with an armed individual in a hospital corridor." He held her gaze. "What happens to you?" It was, she realized, the first time all day anyone had asked her that specific question. Lusk had restored her access credentials as a temporary operational necessity, and that had been the extent of the conversation about her situation. She'd been so focused on the sequencing of problems in front of her that she hadn't applied that same sequencing to herself. "I don't know yet," she said. "Garrison reinstated your credentials under operational necessity. That doesn't automatically translate to, 'I know.'" Lusk can make a case to the hospital administration. "Given what you found and what you did, Logan," she said it quietly, "I know. Let me deal with it when it's in front of me." He held her gaze for a moment, and she saw in it something she recognized as the specific version of respect that came from people who understood exactly what you'd done and knew it had cost something and weren't going to insult it by making it smaller. "Okay," he said. At 6 p.m., Lusk came back to the building. She came in through the side door with the look of someone who had been running at full capacity for 14 hours and was not going to admit it had cost anything because there was still work to be done. She sat down across from Emily and Logan at the table Torres had set up in the main room with coffee, actual coffee, not the field ration variety, and put her hands flat on the table and looked at them both. The documentation held, she said. The federal contacts review was conclusive. The financial records, the transfer timing, and the intelligence Logan was carrying constitute sufficient basis for a federal conspiracy case that the prosecutor believes is prosecutable to conviction. She paused. The Foss threat is significant. Significant enough that the people above me are going to need to be involved in the next phase. This isn't a single corrupt physician anymore. How far does it go? Logan asked. We have confirmed organizational connections linking Foss's secondary identity to a network that has been active for at least 3 years. The financial traces we're pulling from Marcia's records, which are, incidentally, excellent, suggest Kane was one of at least 4 domestic contacts across different cities. She looked at them steadily. The investigation will take months, maybe longer. But Kane and Foss are secured. Yes, and the network has lost its best domestic intelligence asset because Logan is alive and speaking. She looked at Emily. And the person who made that possible by finding a puncture mark and refusing to let it go is sitting in front of me. Emily looked at the coffee. Garrison called, Lusk said. Twice. He wants to talk to you. About reinstating me. Among other things. Lusk was quiet for a moment. Emily, what happened at Ravencrest this morning? The termination, the refused recommendations, the documented record you kept. That's going to be part of the federal case against Kane. The pattern of behavior, the suppression of clinical findings, the use of his position to manage the patient's outcome. Your 14 months of documentation is evidence. She paused. Priya's 8 months is evidence. Together, they establish that Kane's conduct at that hospital was sustained and deliberate, not a single bad decision. Emily absorbed that slowly. 14 months of arriving early and leaving late and writing things down and keeping her head down. 14 months of being visible to no one who had the power to act on what they saw. She'd done it without expectation of outcome, without a plan, without anything other than the ingrained habit of not letting things go undocumented when they didn't add up. It turned out that was enough. It was, she thought, a very human thing. The way the small, unsexy act of writing things down in the right format at the right time could matter more than anything dramatic. What about Priya? She said. She's been interviewed by the federal team. She's cooperative and her records are solid. I don't anticipate any adverse outcome for her professionally. A pause. She's been asking about you. Emily nodded. The meeting with Garrison happened 2 days later at Ravencrest, in his office, which was the same quiet room it had always been, with the same diplomas on the wall and the same plant in the corner that was doing better than it had any right to. He was across the desk and she was in the chair across from him, and it was, in its way, a very simple conversation. He reinstated her. Full clinical privileges, full nursing credentials, retroactive from the date of the termination. He used the phrase administrative error, which was technically accurate and also thoroughly inadequate, and she let it stand because demanding better language from him wasn't what this moment needed. There will be some changes in the trauma department, he said, meaning Kane's position would need to be filled, meaning the department was going to go through the particular institutional disruption of having its structural authority removed abruptly, meaning there would be months of adjustment. I know, she said. If you'd like to return, I'll let you know. He looked at her. Emily, I want to say... He stopped. Started again. I should have paid more attention. It wasn't an apology exactly, but it was the truth, and the truth was the more valuable thing. Yes, she said. You should have. And then, because she wasn't built for extended grievance, I'll be in touch about the position. She walked out of his office and down the hallway of the trauma floor and stopped at the nursing station, where Priya was doing charting with the focused energy of someone who had been through something large and was processing it by returning aggressively to normal function. Priya looked up and saw her and stood up fast enough to knock her pen off the desk. Emily, sit down, Emily said. Priya sat down. Her eyes were doing the thing eyes did when someone was deciding between multiple emotions and hadn't finished the decision yet. 8 months, Emily said. I didn't know what else to do. I couldn't prove anything conclusively. I just kept thinking if I had enough documentation, eventually something. She stopped. I didn't know what you were doing. I didn't know any of it. I just knew something was wrong. I know. Is everything? It's handled, Emily said. You did something that mattered. I need you to know that. Priya looked at her. Then she did something Emily hadn't expected. She didn't cry, didn't collapse, didn't make it large. She just nodded once, the way you nodded when you'd been holding something for a long time, and someone finally acknowledged it had been heavy. Okay, she said. And then, are you coming back? Emily looked at the trauma floor, at the bay numbers, at the monitors visible through the glass of the rooms, at the particular fluorescent texture of a place she'd spent 14 months being invisible in. I don't know yet, she said. It was the honest answer. She found out what she was going to do 4 days later, in a conference room at a federal building in Ashridge, in a meeting that Lusk had arranged and Logan had attended in person for the first time since the hospital, walking without assistance, which he'd informed Torres was happening regardless of Torres's opinion, and which was mostly true except for the slight forward lean that betrayed where his ribs were still healing. There were 3 other people in the room Emily didn't know. 2 in uniform, 1 in civilian clothes, with the bearing of someone who'd been in uniform long enough for it to stick. They introduced themselves with names she was given permission to know, and titles she was given context for, and the conversation was direct in the way conversations were direct, when the people having it had better uses for their time than circling. The unit Logan had told her about was real, and it was being formalized, and the shortlist he'd mentioned, the one where her name appeared 3 times, had become, in the context of the last 5 days, considerably shorter. We're not asking because of what happened at Ravencrest, said the woman in civilian clothes, whose name was Hargrove, and who had the quality of someone who'd been underestimated a lot and had stopped caring about it. We were building to this offer before any of this. What happened at Ravencrest confirmed the assessment, but it didn't create it. Emily looked at her. What's the assessment? That you're the specific combination of clinical precision and operational instinct that this unit needs. That you make good decisions under pressure without needing the pressure to stop first. That you don't perform the work, you do it. Hargrove paused. And that you've spent 14 months in an environment that was actively working against you, and you didn't leave, and you didn't stop, and you kept the record clean. I kept the record clean because it was the right thing to do. We know, that's the point. Emily looked at Logan, who was sitting to her left, and who had the expression of someone who was staying carefully neutral because he understood this had to be her decision and was finding it somewhat difficult to stay that neutral. She looked at her hands, at the knuckle that had finished bruising and was fading now, at the shape of a life that had been reorganized in 5 days in ways she hadn't planned and hadn't seen coming, and that had cost her things, a job, a routine, a version of invisible safety she'd built carefully, and had given her back something she'd put away 6 years ago when she'd decided she was done with the work. She hadn't been done. She'd been tired. Those were different. What does the unit do specifically? She said. Hargrove told her. Emily listened without interrupting, which took some discipline because the description was, it was the right thing. Not because it was exciting or because it was what she'd trained for, but because it was the work that needed doing and that almost no one was equipped to do, and she was equipped, and that combination had always felt to her like the closest thing to an obligation. I have conditions, Emily said. Hargrove's expression shifted slightly. Not surprise exactly, but the adjustment of someone recalibrating. Tell me. Priya Anand gets a formal commendation in her hospital record for the documentation she maintained. Not classified, not buried, so actual institutional recognition. She held Hargrove's gaze. She's a second-year resident who did something most attending physicians wouldn't have had the discipline to do. She deserves to have that on the record. Hargrove nodded. Done. Prentice gets full medical coverage for his recovery. Not field coverage, actual civilian hospital coverage under his real name. Already in motion. And I want to be involved in the Foss investigation as far as my clearance permits. Not because I need to be, but because I spent 14 months at that hospital and I want to understand the full shape of what was being built there. Hargrove looked at her for a moment. Then she looked at Logan, then back. That last one, she said. we can work with. Emily said yes. It wasn't an uncomplicated yes. She drove home that evening to the apartment she'd been living in for 14 months. Small, functional, the kind of place that had never quite accumulated the texture of being truly lived in because she'd been spending most of her time at the hospital. And she sat in her kitchen with the lights off for a while and let herself be in the complicated space of a decision made. She thought about what she was leaving. The floor, the routines, the specific satisfaction of clinical work in a known environment. Priya down the hall. The small, ordinary competencies of being a person who did the same thing well, day after day, in the same building. She thought about what she'd been before she'd decided she was done with it. The work. The being useful in the specific way that required everything you had and asked for more. The knowledge that what you were doing was inside a thing that mattered in ways that were larger than a single shift. She thought about Logan in the bay at 3:21 a.m., his hand closing around her fingers. She thought about Priya writing things down for 8 months with no audience. She thought about Prentice at a rest stop picnic table with broken ribs and his hand still on the drive. She thought, people are doing the right thing in the dark all the time, in the margins of their ordinary lives, without an audience, without a guarantee, just because it's the right thing and the only honest alternative is not doing it. She thought, that's what I've been doing, and it turned out to be enough. It turned out to be exactly enough. She turned the kitchen light on. There was a formal event 2 weeks later, not a press conference, not a ceremony in any traditional sense, but a gathering at Ravencrest's administration hall that had been arranged at Garrison's initiative and that Emily had agreed to attend because Priya had asked her to, and that was sufficient reason. The federal case against Kane had produced its first significant public development that morning. A federal judge had denied bail, citing flight risk and the breadth of the conspiracy charges, and the news had gone through the hospital the way news went through closed environments, fast and with a particular electric quality, the feeling of a thing finally becoming real that everyone had suspected but nobody had said out loud. Kane's face had been on the local news the night before, handcuffed, being walked to a vehicle. His attorney making a statement that his client maintained his innocence and that the charges were politically motivated, which was exactly what attorneys said when they didn't have anything better to say. Emily had watched the footage once. Then she'd turned it off. Not because it wasn't satisfying. It was. It was the specific satisfaction of watching a specific harm become a specific consequence, which was as close as the world usually got to justice in its cleanest form. But dwelling on it wasn't useful, and it wasn't who she was. And she had 3 days of briefings ahead of her that required her to be sharp. The gathering at Ravencrest was smaller than she'd expected. Garrison, Priya, a handful of the nursing staff she'd worked with, Weston, who'd evacuated the floor on her instruction without a second's hesitation and who shook her hand with a grip that said everything he didn't. A few of the residents. Torres had come, which surprised her. Lusk had sent a message she'd read twice and kept. Logan was there. He walked in under his own power, the slight lean from the ribs essentially invisible to anyone who hadn't been watching him for the last 2 weeks. And he was in civilian clothes rather than uniform, and he looked, she thought, like a man who was glad to be walking into a room. He caught her eye across the space and nodded once. She nodded back. Garrison said some things. She listened with the detached attention of someone who understood that this kind of moment served a function for the institution rather than for her, and that was fine. Institutions needed their moments. The people who worked inside them needed to see the institution account for something. When he got to her specifically, she stood where she was and let it wash over her. The specific words about clinical acuity and personal courage and upholding the hospital's commitment to patient care, which was a careful framing that covered the messier truth underneath it. But that was all right. Priya was recognized separately, and that was the part Emily watched. Priya, who went slightly pink and stood up very straight and held her hands in front of her like someone who wasn't sure what to do with them, and received the words with the expression of someone who'd been doing the right thing alone for so long that being acknowledged for it felt strange. Emily caught her eye. Priya looked at her for a second, and then looked at the floor, and then back up. Emily gave her the smallest nod she could give while still making it visible. You did good. Priya's chin lifted a fraction. Something settled in her face. After, In the hallway outside the administration hall, Logan found her. "How are you doing with it?" he said. "With which part?" "Any of it. All of it." He was standing next to her, not in front of her, which was a specific choice that said something about how he understood space. She thought about it honestly. "Still processing," she said. "That's the truth. That's the right answer." "You start processing when you're ready," she said, "not when someone else decides the timeline." "Yes." She looked down the hallway, at the trauma floor beyond the doors, at the bay numbers visible through the glass, at the light that was the same fluorescent institutional light it had always been. "I spent 14 months being invisible in this building," she said. "Not because I had to be, because I thought it was the safest option. Keep your head down. Do the work. Don't make it about yourself." She paused. "And I was wrong." Logan looked at her. "Not about the head down and do the work part." "That's right. That's always right." She paused. "But there's a version of invisible that's just hiding, deciding in advance that no one will listen, so you don't speak. And I did that too. And it costs things." "Logan Reed is alive," he said. 14 months in," she said. "Because one night it was finally specific enough that I couldn't stay quiet." She paused. "I don't want to wait for it to be that specific again." He was quiet for a moment, then, "Is that why you said yes?" "That's part of it." "What's the other part?" She looked at him, at the lines around his eyes that were the same kind of lines she had around hers, built from being in situations that required everything and didn't guarantee anything back. "The other part is that I was good at it," she said simply, "and I missed being good at it, and I'm done pretending I didn't." He smiled, not broadly, not performed, just a small, real thing. "Welcome back, Carter," he said. She started the new position on a Monday, which was her preference. She'd never been someone who understood why people started things on Mondays as a symbolic choice, but she understood that she did her best work when the week was new and the structure was clear. The briefings were dense, and the clearance process had taken all of those 2 weeks, and the unit was small. 6 people, including her, plus Logan when he was recovered enough to be operational, which his doctors had said was 6 weeks and he had said was 3, and they would negotiate from there. Her first week was reading and context building and the orientation tasks of someone coming into an established system that needed to absorb a new element. She did it the way she did everything, methodically, without performing the effort, asking the questions that needed asking and not the ones she could answer herself. On the Thursday of that first week, she got a call from a number she didn't recognize with an area code she didn't know. "Miss Carter," a woman's voice. "My name is Dr. Adela Rowe. I'm calling from the Medical Review Board regarding a formal complaint filed concerning the termination of your nursing credentials." Emily paused. "I wasn't aware there was a formal complaint." "It was filed on your behalf," Rowe said, "by a Dr. Priya Anand." A brief pause. "The board has completed its review, and I'm calling to inform you that the termination has been formally classified as retaliatory and entered into Dr. Kane's professional record accordingly. Your credentials have been cleared of any adverse notation." Emily sat for a moment. She hadn't asked for that. Priya had done it without telling her, the same way Priya had been doing things without telling anyone for 8 months. Quietly, carefully, because it was the right thing to do. "Thank you," Emily said. "Please extend my thanks to Dr. Anand." "I will," Rowe said. "One more thing. The board took note of the clinical documentation you maintained during your time at Ravencrest. It's been remarked on for its thoroughness." "I was just doing my job," Emily said. "Yes," Rowe said. "That's what makes it remarkable." After the call ended, Emily sat for a moment in the new office that didn't yet have her things in it. Just the desk, the chair, a window that looked out over a street she was still learning the names of. She thought about the puncture mark, about the size of it, smaller than a dime, about how many people had looked at that patient that night, and how many had touched him, and how many had done everything right by the clinical standards they'd been trained to and had missed it. She'd seen it because she knew what to look for. She knew what to look for because she'd been somewhere that taught her, years ago, in conditions she hadn't chosen but had survived. She'd survived them imperfectly, with costs and complications, the way people survived things in real life. And then she'd spent 6 years being quiet about it, being grateful to be in a normal room doing a normal job, telling herself that the ordinary was enough, that the extraordinary had been a phase, that she'd put that version of herself somewhere safe, and that it wasn't loss, it was growth. It wasn't growth, it was fear dressed up as wisdom. The difference, she understood now, sitting in the new office in the new position on a Thursday morning with the sun coming through the window at an angle she hadn't mapped yet. The difference was that the ordinary was only enough if it was actually what you were. If it was a costume, eventually something would see through it. A puncture mark. A tap code on a hospital gurney at 4 in the morning. A choice made in a corridor at the edge of your own limits. She didn't believe that things happened for a reason. In the easy sense, people meant that. But she believed that preparation and circumstance collided sometimes in ways that became necessary. That the thing you'd built in yourself, through years of hard work and hard places, and deciding not to stop, that thing was there for something. Even if you'd tried to put it away, especially if you'd tried to put it away. She opened the first briefing document on her desk and read the heading and started at the top. She was 29 years old. She'd been invisible for 14 months, and before that for parts of 6 years, in different ways, for different reasons. She'd documented everything and said little and endured things that didn't deserve to be endured and come out of it with her hands steady and her record clean and a clarity about what she was capable of that no one could take back from her. The woman who'd been treated like a nobody had always known exactly who she was. She'd just been waiting for a room that was ready to find out. She turned the page. She got to work.